Are you in a relationship with someone who seems emotionally distant, yet you can't shake the feeling that there's something deeper going on underneath the silence? You're not imagining it. And no, you're not too much. I'm Jim Rohn, and in this video, we're going to talk about something that almost no one tells you. Avoidants do crave connection. They just don't always know how to let it in. Maybe you've found yourself tiptoeing around your avoidant partner's moods, holding back your feelings to avoid pushing them away. You want more closeness, but every time you move toward them, they pull back. It feels like a game of emotional tug-of-war, and it leaves you wondering, do they even care? Do they even want this? Here's what most people don't realize. Avoidants deeply want emotional safety. They want connection, yes, but not just any kind of connection. They're looking for something specific, something subtle, something that often goes unspoken. And if you can learn to understand what that is, everything changes. In this video, I'm going to break down exactly what avoidants secretly crave and why they struggle to ask for it. We'll unpack how their nervous system reacts to intimacy, the kinds of support they find soothing, even if they don't say it, and the surprising ways they express emotional needs without using words. If you've ever felt stuck between your desire for intimacy and their fear of it, this is the insight you've been missing. By the end of this video, you'll have a clearer roadmap for connection, one that doesn't involve chasing, begging, or losing yourself to keep the peace. If this topic resonates with you, hit that subscribe button now. I post weekly videos to help you navigate relationships with emotional clarity, healthy boundaries, and self-respect. Let's get into it: what avoidants secretly crave from you, and how to meet that need without abandoning yourself in the process. To really understand what avoidants secretly crave, we first have to step inside their mindset. And that's not always easy, because avoidants often come across as cold, aloof, or uninterested in emotional closeness. But that external behavior doesn't reflect a lack of feeling. In fact, in many cases, it's the opposite. Avoidants tend to feel deeply, but they've learned to keep those emotions locked down because somewhere along the way they associated vulnerability with danger. You see, for most avoidant individuals, closeness was either overwhelming, unpredictable, or even unsafe in their early relationships. Maybe they had caregivers who were intrusive, emotionally inconsistent, or dismissive. So instead of learning that emotional intimacy is safe, they developed a survival strategy. Don't rely on others. Stay in control. Keep your emotions to yourself. That mindset becomes ingrained, and as they grow into adulthood, it follows them into their romantic relationships. That's why avoidants are often fiercely independent. They need space, not because they don't care, but because space feels safe. Autonomy gives them a sense of control over their environment and emotions. But here's the part most people miss. Even avoidants want connection. They just want it on terms that don't threaten their sense of self. They crave closeness, but only if it comes with emotional safety, meaning no pressure, no chasing, no emotional chaos. If they sense too much intensity or expectation, they often shut down as a reflex. Their emotional detachment isn't about not loving you. It's about not knowing how to stay regulated when emotions rise. They fear engulfment, losing themselves in someone else's needs or feelings. So they pull back to avoid the feeling of being overwhelmed. But deep inside, many avoidants are lonely. They long to be seen and accepted, but they're afraid that if someone really sees them, they'll either disappoint that person or lose their independence. What they secretly crave is a sense of safety and closeness. They want to be with someone who isn't reactive, who doesn't rush them, who respects their emotional pace. They're looking for emotional stability, not dramatic highs and lows. They're drawn to people who can hold space, who are present, calm and clear in their communication without needing constant validation or reassurance. That kind of presence calms their nervous system. It tells them you're safe here. You're not being swallowed. You can open up when you're ready. So while it may look like they don't care, the truth is that avoidants often care a lot. They're just wired to suppress those feelings in order to stay emotionally safe. Understanding this isn't about excusing hurtful behavior, but it does help you respond from a place of clarity instead of insecurity. When you understand the avoidant mindset, you stop personalizing their distance and start making healthier decisions about how to engage or not from your own secure center. And that's where true emotional power lives. One of the most misunderstood truths about avoidantly attached individuals is this: they deeply crave connection. Yes, even the ones who seem emotionally unavailable. Even the ones who pull away just when things start to get close. Their craving for connection isn't always obvious. In fact, they often hide it from others and even from themselves. But it's there, quietly shaping their behavior beneath the surface. And if you're in a relationship with someone who leans avoidant, understanding this hidden craving can change everything about how you navigate that dynamic. On the outside, avoidants often look distant, self-contained, and uninterested in closeness. They tend to prioritize independence. They guard their time, their space, and especially their emotions. They might even say things like, "I don't need anyone," or "I'm just not that emotional." And while these statements may feel cold, they're usually a form of emotional armor. Behind those walls is someone who does want intimacy, but has learned that getting too close means risking their sense of safety, control, or self. The truth is, avoidants long for authentic connection, but on very specific terms. What they crave isn't intensity or emotional fireworks. They're not looking for constant reassurance or drama. What they want is safety, a steady, non-intrusive presence that allows them to come forward at their own pace. In many ways, avoidants are looking for emotional consistency. They don't need a partner who demands closeness. They need a partner who knows how to hold closeness without pushing, without chasing, and without abandoning their own needs in the process. This is where things get tricky, because when the avoidant starts to feel emotionally close, their nervous system often interprets it as a threat. They've been wired to equate intimacy with vulnerability and vulnerability with pain, shame, or loss of control. So just as things start to deepen, they may instinctively pull back. They don't do this because they don't care. They do it because closeness triggers old emotional memories, ones they haven't fully processed or learned to navigate. But here's the paradox: despite pulling away, they still want connection. They still want to be loved, seen, and accepted. They just don't know how to stay present in the discomfort of closeness. That's why their deepest craving often goes unmet, not because it's impossible to meet, but because they haven't developed the tools or language to express what they really need. A connection that doesn't cost them their sense of self. So what do avoidants really need from a partner? First, they need emotional stability. Someone who isn't reactive. Someone who can tolerate moments of distance without spinning out. When you don't take their withdrawal personally, when you stay grounded instead of chasing or shutting down, it tells the avoidant, "You're safe. I'm not going to overwhelm you, and I'm not going to abandon you." That's when they start to come forward little by little. Second, they need space with presence. This can sound like a contradiction, but it's actually a subtle balance. They want to know that they can breathe, that they're not being emotionally cornered. But they also want to know you're still there, emotionally available, consistent, not disappearing in return. It's a kind of emotional anchoring. You're near, but not pressing. Close, but not invasive. That kind of presence builds trust slowly, and for avoidance, trust is the door to connection. Third, they need a partner who doesn't define their worth through the avoidance behavior. This is crucial, because avoidants often test the relationship consciously or unconsciously by pulling away just to see if it's still safe. If your self-esteem rises and falls with their closeness, they'll feel pressure, and pressure breeds fear. But when you show that you're okay, even when they step back, they start to feel that it's safe to stay. That's why the most secure way to love an avoidant is to hold both truths at once. They crave connection and they fear it. They want to be close, but they need it to feel emotionally manageable. They don't need you to fix them. They need you to respect their rhythm while staying rooted in your own. That kind of relational maturity gives the avoidant space to grow. And slowly, they will if they're emotionally available enough to meet you halfway. Of course, this doesn't mean tolerating emotional neglect or one-sided effort. Your needs matter just as much. You're not meant to be their emotional caretaker. You're meant to walk beside them, not carry them. If they consistently push you away, resist reflection, or make no effort to engage with your needs, it's okay to step back. Love without reciprocity isn't love, it's self-abandonment. But when two people, one avoidant, one secure, can hold space for each other's needs while staying true to themselves, something beautiful can happen. The avoidant begins to realize that connection doesn't have to mean loss of self. And the partner begins to feel that closeness can be built without chaos. And in that space, a deeper kind of intimacy is born, quiet, steady, and rooted in mutual respect. That's the kind of connection avoidants crave most. When it comes to relationships with avoidantly attached individuals, one of the most damaging things that can happen is misunderstanding their behavior. And it's not just a minor issue, it's often the root of deep emotional pain, ongoing conflict, and a breakdown in connection. The avoidant partner might not be trying to hurt anyone. In fact, many of them are just trying to manage their own discomfort. But when their behavior is misread, it can leave their partner feeling rejected, unwanted, or even emotionally unsafe. That's when the real damage begins, not just to the relationship, but to each person's emotional well-being. Let's start with what usually happens. The avoidant gets close, either emotionally or physically, and then suddenly withdraws. The partner, especially if they lean anxious, experiences this shift as abandonment. They think, did I say too much? Was I too needy? Why did they pull away right when things were getting good? It feels personal, and the more personal it feels, the more reactive the partner becomes. They reach out, ask questions, or try to pull the avoidant back in. But from the avoidant's perspective, that reaction confirms their deepest fear, that closeness leads to emotional pressure or loss of control. So now both people feel misunderstood. The partner feels rejected, and the avoidant feels smothered. What started as a moment of potential closeness has now become a tug of war, and neither person feels safe. This leads to what we call the pursuer-distancer dynamic, one person reaching the other, retreating. And if this dynamic isn't addressed with real awareness, it turns into a painful cycle that wears down the connection over time. Avoidants in particular struggle with this because they often don't know how to explain what they're feeling. Their withdrawal isn't a calculated decision, it's a reflex. They're trying to calm themselves down to feel safe again. But to the person on the other end, it feels like punishment or coldness. So the partner starts walking on eggshells, afraid to be honest about their needs for fear of pushing the avoidant further away. Emotional honesty starts to disappear, replaced by second-guessing and overthinking. This kind of misunderstanding also leads to deep emotional isolation on both sides. The avoidant may begin to believe that closeness always leads to conflict, The partner may begin to believe that love always means chasing or not being enough. Both narratives are painful, and if these roles are repeated often enough, both individuals can end up in patterns that mirror emotional neglect, feeling alone, unseen, and disconnected even in the middle of a relationship. That's why it's so important to bring awareness to what's really going on beneath the surface. When you understand the avoidant's inner world, how their nervous system reacts to intimacy, how past experiences shaped their fear of vulnerability, you stop seeing their distance as rejection. You start to see it as a form of protection. That doesn't mean you excuse harmful behavior, but it gives you the perspective to respond with clarity instead of emotional chaos. It's also essential to acknowledge the partner's experience. Being on the receiving end of avoidant behavior can be confusing and painful. If you don't know what you're dealing with, you can easily fall into self-blame or anxious over-functioning, trying harder, over-explaining, or proving your worth in the hopes of being chosen. But none of that creates safety. It only deepens the emotional divide. So what's the way out of this cycle? It starts with communication. Clear, grounded, and non-reactive communication. If you're the partner of someone avoidant, you can say something like, "When things suddenly shift between us, I feel unsure. I value connection, and I want to understand how we can support that without either of us feeling overwhelmed." That opens the door to dialogue instead of drama. And if you're the avoidant in the relationship, it means learning how to tolerate moments of discomfort without immediately retreating. It means practicing emotional presence even in small doses. Saying something like, "I notice I get overwhelmed when things move too fast. I need a little time to process, but I'm not checking out of the relationship," can go a long way in preventing your partner from feeling abandoned. Ultimately, the biggest impact of misunderstanding in avoidant dynamics is disconnection. But with awareness, emotional maturity, and a willingness to name what's happening without blame, that disconnection can start to shift. Instead of pulling further apart, both people can begin to find the rhythm that allows connection to feel safe again. Because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing: to feel seen, to feel secure, and to know that love doesn't have to mean losing ourselves. Avoidants want that too. They just need it to come in a form they can handle. And when both people understand that, healing can begin. When you're in a relationship with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, it's easy to feel like you're speaking two different emotional languages. You want closeness, openness, and emotional warmth, but they seem to thrive on distance, independence, and control. The frustration builds. You start to wonder if they care at all, or if you're the only one trying. But the truth is, many avoidant individuals do care deeply. They just show it differently, and often in ways that are harder to recognize if you're used to more expressive forms of connection. This is why empathy and patience are so essential. Empathy doesn't mean excusing emotional shutdowns or tolerating neglect. It means understanding that avoidant behavior is usually driven by fear, not malice. Most avoidants learned early on that vulnerability wasn't safe. They were taught directly or indirectly that the best way to protect themselves was to be self-reliant, emotionally reserved, and guarded. So when you approach them with closeness, even if it's coming from a good place, it can trigger their old programming. And unless they've done a lot of inner work, their instinct will often be to back away, not lean in. That's where your presence matters. If you want to build a real connection with an avoidant, you have to bring emotional steadiness to the table. That means regulating your own nervous system first, so you're not reacting from fear, anxiety, or urgency. When you're grounded, you can respond rather than react. You can hold space instead of rushing to fill it. And that's what avoidants need most. someone who won't collapse into panic when they need space, and someone who won't abandon themselves in order to stay close. But this doesn't mean silencing your needs. In fact, the most powerful thing you can do in a relationship with an avoidant is to communicate your needs clearly and respectfully. Don't assume they know what you need emotionally, they probably don't. And don't wait until you're angry or exhausted to express it. Be proactive and speak from self-awareness. I value emotional closeness in relationships. When I don't hear from you for a few days, I start to feel disconnected. I don't expect constant communication, but it's important for me to feel some regular check-ins. That kind of language is calm, honest, and rooted in self-respect. You're not accusing, you're not controlling, you're just stating what's real for you. And that's crucial. Because avoidants don't respond well to emotional pressure, but they can respond well to emotional clarity, especially when it's delivered in a way that honors both people's needs. Another key strategy is creating a safe emotional environment, one where they feel they can be honest without being shamed, overwhelmed, or rushed. For many avoidants, emotional expression feels foreign and risky. So if they open up even a little, it matters. Respond with patience. Celebrate the effort, not just the content. If they say, "I'm not great at talking about feelings, but I do care," don't demand more. Don't press them into a deeper conversation right away. Acknowledge the step they did take. That builds trust slowly but surely. And remember, safety doesn't mean avoiding hard conversations. It means having those conversations in a way that's emotionally mature. You can set boundaries and still be kind. You can ask for more connection and still be respectful. In fact, boundaries are what make emotional safety real. When you communicate, "I want to be in this with you, but I also need to feel emotionally considered," you give them a choice. You're not chasing or begging, you're inviting partnership. And sometimes that invitation will go unanswered. Not because you weren't good enough, but because some avoidants simply aren't ready or willing to step into real connection. That's not your fault, and it's not your job to force growth that someone isn't choosing. Your job is to show up as your most emotionally honest, grounded self, and then watch what they do with that. When you do this, when you meet avoidant behavior with clarity, patience, and firm self-respect, you give the relationship its best shot at deepening. You show the avoidant that intimacy doesn't have to mean chaos. You model emotional safety, not by fixing or rescuing, but by staying steady within yourself. That's how bridges are built, not through force, but through presence. And sometimes those bridges lead to real connection. Other times, they reveal incompatibility. Either way, you walk away with your dignity intact. Because in learning how to love someone with an avoidant style, you also learn how to love yourself more deeply, and that in itself is worth everything. If you're in a relationship with someone who has an avoidant attachment style, you already know this journey isn't linear. It's not fast, it's not easy, and it definitely doesn't follow the traditional script of emotional closeness. There are moments of connection followed by retreat, times when they open up followed by silence. And if you're not careful, it's easy to let frustration or hopelessness take over. But if you've chosen to be in this kind of relationship, and they're showing a willingness to grow, then it's crucial to understand what that path actually looks like. Because building trust and intimacy with an avoidant takes time, patience, and consistent emotional maturity from both sides. Avoidants don't usually leap into vulnerability. They inch into it. And that means you'll often be the first one holding emotional ground. You might be the one who brings up the hard conversations, who notices the subtle changes, who names what's happening. That doesn't mean you carry the whole relationship, but it does mean you'll likely need to lead with security if you want to make real progress. Trust is built over time through consistency, not intensity. So if you're expecting fast emotional breakthroughs, you'll probably end up disappointed. But if you're paying attention to the small wins, you'll start to notice the subtle signs of growth. Maybe they finally acknowledge a feeling they'd normally avoid. Maybe they send a check-in text after pulling away. Maybe they ask you a deeper question or admit that something scared them. These might not look like much from the outside, but for someone with avoidant wiring, they're major steps. And your response matters. Instead of demanding more, celebrate what they offered. Let them feel safe in that small moment of vulnerability. That's how progress becomes momentum. Still, it's vital to remember real connection takes two. You can create safety, model emotional health, and communicate clearly, but it only works if the avoidant is also willing to step in. They have to choose vulnerability too, because as much as they crave connection, it can't exist if they remain behind a wall. At some point, both partners must be willing to meet in the middle, not just physically, but emotionally. That means you have to be vulnerable too, not just patient, not just understanding, but open. You get to share your fears, your boundaries, your needs, not as ultimatums, but as expressions of your truth. That kind of transparency invites reciprocity. And if it's met with respect, it creates the foundation for something real. But if your vulnerability is constantly met with silence or distance, it might be time to ask the hard question: is this person truly capable of showing up emotionally? Navigating a relationship with an avoidant partner is not about walking on eggshells or doing all the work. It's about staying grounded in who you are while also understanding who they are. It's about walking the line between empathy and self-respect. And it's about recognizing that love to be real requires effort on both sides. So stay mindful, celebrate progress, keep the door open, but don't leave yourself waiting in the hallway, because connection is never built by one person knocking forever. It's built when both people slowly, steadily, and willingly step through the door together. Navigating a relationship with an avoidant partner isn't about being perfect, endlessly patient, or learning how to tiptoe around someone's emotional edges. It's about understanding what's underneath the surface: fear, protection, deep longing, and deciding if you're both willing to meet each other where you are without losing yourselves in the process. In this video, we've explored the often hidden emotional world of avoidance. We talked about their deep, though rarely expressed desire for connection, how their need for independence stems from past wounds, and the ways misunderstandings can cause unnecessary hurt on both sides. We looked at how frustration, miscommunication, and emotional distance create a cycle of isolation that can be broken only with awareness, compassion, and clear communication. You've learned how empathy and boundaries can work together, how to communicate your needs with honesty and respect, and how to build emotional safety without sacrificing your self-worth. We also discussed the importance of celebrating small wins, tracking progress, and remembering that both partners must be willing to take emotional risks for genuine intimacy to grow. The takeaway here is simple but powerful. You deserve connection that honors your voice, not just your silence. Yes, relationships with avoidance can be meaningful, but only when there's mutual effort, emotional responsibility, and space for both people to be seen. Your job isn't to pull love out of someone who hides it. It's to create conditions for connection and see if they meet you there. Thank you for watching and sharing this space with me. If this video helped you feel more seen or brought clarity to your situation, I'd love for you to join our community. Subscribe to the channel for more grounded, emotionally intelligent content on relationships, attachment, and self-worth. Leave a comment below. Have you experienced this dynamic with an avoidant partner? What strategies have helped you stay anchored in your truth while holding space for theirs? Let's keep growing together with clarity, courage, and connection that doesn't cost your peace. I'll see you in the next one.